gory, what a hell of a way to die. Gory, gory, what a hell of a way to die. Gory, gory, what a hell of a way to die. He ain't gonna jump no more. Zoom, zoom.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. Francis is out this week, and so it's just me with a special guest. As you may know, I deployed to Afghanistan with the 1st Battalion, 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment in 2009. What you may not know, or what you might have deduced, is that I was deployed with that unit when one of our BCO soldiers walked out of an outpost in the middle of the night and got captured by the Taliban. His name was, of course, Bergdahl. It's been 10 years since that day, and given how much has elapsed since then, I decided to reach out to my friend Jon Thurman, who was an enlisted soldier in BCO 1501 and later appeared in the Serial podcast during their exploration of Bergdahl's story. Jon may be the most self-actualized veteran of that deployment that I've ever encountered. We talked about our experiences during the search for Bergdahl, the insane period when his return to the U.S. was a scandal on Fox News, and where we found ourselves in our lives a decade later. I hope you enjoy. Jon, thank you so much for making time to be on the show. It's great to talk to you again in person. How are you doing?
Oh, you too, sir. You too. Good. Really good. It's a beautiful day here in the Pacific Northwest. Saturday. Can't complain.
That's awesome. Well, people may recognize your voice, and probably because if they listen to the Serial Season 2 talking about Bo Bergdahl, you featured relatively prominently in that. And your interview was interesting to me because on one hand, Sarah Koenig was, in my opinion, kind of combative, but then also you gave this very interesting interview at the end where you talked about the sort of shift in perspective that you'd had over the course of the whole story. And so I want to get into that, but more than anything, I realized tomorrow is literally 10 years since Bergdahl went missing. And
wow, is it really?
10 years to the day. And so 10 years ago, at FOB Sharana, Afghanistan, I was a first lieutenant. You were a sergeant or a staff sergeant at the time?
Oh, no. Don't promote me that quickly. I think I was a PFC.
Oh, shit. For some reason, I thought you were like a squad leader at the time. I mean,
No,
okay.
Not at all.
Shit. Okay. Well, regardless, you were there. You were in BCO, right?
Yeah, I was.
All right.
Platoon.
So I've told the story a bunch of times, and I'll do the quick version now. I was at a meeting for planning the election. We were meeting with at the OCCP at provincial headquarters in downtown Toronto, basically.
That was at Rushmore, wasn't it?
Yeah, Rushmore. Yeah, so on the other side of Rushmore, basically, off the fob, but still in the compound. And so I walked out of the meeting where we had been talking with the governor and all these other people. And as I'm walking out, one of the PRT security platoon people was talking on an embedder radio, and he's like, "Say that again. There's an American soldier missing." And I was like, oh, fuck. Because I had heard all the stories from the guys who had deployed to Iraq about what happens when there's a dust one or duty status whereabouts unknown. And I was like, oh, shit, I hope this gets resolved fast. And I went to go, because they said everybody in HHC needs to check in. I went down to the OCCP talk and got on the radio. And I remember years later having this discussion because Jason Fry from BCO was on working the radio that day. And he said to me, it's got to be Bergdahl. And I was like, who the fuck is Bergdahl?
Right.
So where were you? And how did you find out?
Yeah, so it would have been 10 years ago this morning. I was walking from the barracks, or I wouldn't even call them that, the billets on FOB Sharana.
Yeah.
And I was actually getting ready to go up and get and I don't know if I can say this, I'm sure I can, go up and get the new fill on the SKL.
Yeah.
And I was walking up to the talk, and my plan was walk to the talk, get the fill, go back, fill the trucks, go to chow, go lift, and then go on patrol. Because from my scope, what we were getting ready to do was hand over Mess Malak outpost to the ANP.
Yep.
And it was supposed to be our last rotation out there. So, there was a little excitement. We're like, all right, we're going to do 1 or 2 more nights. This is going to be it. It's going to be over. So en route, I run into Castaneda coming back from the talk, and he says to me, somebody's missing. And I said, who? And he said, it's Bergdahl. And I'd had very brief interactions at NTC and a couple times in 632 back at J-Bear.
Yeah.
But beyond that, and seeing him kind of floating around Mess Malak, I was like, what the fuck? What do you mean he's missing?
So you guys, to give a little bit of background on this, because some people may not have followed. I was the HHCXO at the time, and Captain Miller, Lieutenant Miller, the BCO XO, shared an office with me, and he told me about some of like the difficulties with Mes Malak, that they had decided to build an outpost, but it wasn't like a fob or a cop or anything. It was literally a bunch of parked vehicles and some concrete barriers, and if I remember correctly, the only hard stand structure I remember seeing was literally just a shed for the water. It was very austere, and platoons of BCO were having to rotate in and out and basically man this traffic checkpoint, if you will, out in the middle of what was, not in the desert, but basically really dusty farmland, and for days at a time. And you were you out there having to do those rotations?
Oh, all the time. When looking back on it, it wasn't bad. It was away from the flagpole at Sharana, which, as we all know, is kind of nice.
Yeah.
But it was very, very primitive, especially in the infrastructure. I just remember, HESCOs, C-wire, and the C-wire wasn't even on top of the HESCOs. The C-wire was on the ground.
On the ground,
there was a little entrenchment built in, and then the HESCOs were just kind of stacked, but I didn't really know why. There was sort of like a room back there.
Yeah.
Around that shed.
I remember, so I periodically got asked to help out with the battalion commander's TAC with Colonel Baker. And I think partly because at the time, Staff Sergeant Pagano, or Sergeant Pagano at the time, was running it. But also I think they kind of took a little bit of pity on me, because here I was done with my platoon leader time before deployment, working HHCXO, and most of the stuff that I was doing all day was like going to meetings and updating spreadsheets. And they were like, fuck, well, we could use a guy, another infantry officer. Could you come along? And so I'd go on these missions periodically with them, just to sort of like help them just do the basic sort of things for patrols. Like, it wasn't anything complicated. I mean, you've done those hundreds of times, but obviously for me, I was like, hell yeah, give me any chance to get outside of the fob. And I remember
for sure
going down to Yusuf Kel, going down to, I realized later, going down to Yahya Kel Bazaar and all these different places, and stopping at the Mesto P. And I just remember thinking, going in there, like, man, this fucking sucks. I mean, this is like this is basically a patrol base. And that was in May, before Lieutenant Cody got blown up, before Lieutenant Bradshaw got killed, before anything had really, like, if I remember correctly, there had been a couple of ticks at Mes Malak. There was the one where the OCCP had gotten rocketed, and like, I want to say that a platoon from Blackfoot, but it might have been somebody else, had to go and react where like an A-10 had strafed a house by mistake. But like, stuff hadn't really heated up yet. And then all in the span of that week, I found myself doing the ramp ceremony for Lieutenant Bradshaw, and then 3 or 4 days later, I was down at Mes Malak bringing supplies to the Battalion XO, who looked like he hadn't slept in like 4 days. And he's just like, people were just like, what the fuck is going on? This guy just walked off in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And I just remember this just constant frantic activity, because they were just, every day they were, on my side, it was either go out on these patrols to resupply them by road, or help pack a fucking pallet that's going to get airdropped to one of like the 12 platoons we've got maneuvering right now looking for this guy.
Right.
And running up to the airfield on Sharana and packing stuff. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, you're a private in an infantry platoon. What happened for you?
So we immediately, and this was when Lieutenant Doyle was still our platoon leader.
Yep.
So I get back to the little billeting area, and immediately we get the brief. Somebody's fucking missing. We don't know what's going on. It's Bergdahl. We're going now.
Yeah.
So we packed a bag, because of course you hope for the best when you don't really have like the full spectrum idea in your head, and you can't really conceptualize, holy shit, somebody's missing in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But we're the United States Army, and we've got we've got ISAF, we've got a multinational force here. This will be a 2-hour thing. So we pack like, an overnight kit to go camp out at Mes Malak, and it turns into like 12 days
of
non-stop searching. into places and we've never been, and routes we've never driven on. I remember one time, I think this had to have been day like 6. I mean, because again, everything gets real fluid in my memory at that point. It just kind of all bleeds together, and there's no real stop and end. But I remember we hit 5 IEDs rolling down one route.
Jesus.
Yeah, in Humvees. Fortunately, they weren't very big. But, of course, like when anything happens in the military, and I know you saw this at your level, stuff gets passed down the PNN or the private news network.
Yeah, of course.
So there's a bunch of hearsay. And when we finally get out to Mess Malak, I link up with some of my homies that I lived in 632 with, and I'm getting feedback from them, and I'm talking to like Nascimento. I think Buto wasn't even there at that point, but Nascimento was telling me, Bergdahl had been, up here on guard the last couple of days. He'd been looking at those mountains. He'd said things like, wouldn't it be great to just go up there and be a mercenary? And then, the news starts trickling down that the evidence is starting to line up that this was a voluntary desertion.
Yeah.
And they were saying, well, he left his sensitive items. He left his IOTV. And that's when everything sort of started falling into place, at least from our level. But that then brings up the question, okay, if this dude walked off, why the fuck are we still out looking? He's probably in Pakistan.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always thought about it in retrospect, like, you're in a weird position to be able to say, look, we're not going to find this guy because we have to make the sort of show that we're looking. But at the same time, if you don't find that guy in the first 24 hours, chances are good someone else has, and he's nowhere to be found. And to me, it was like, I said this kind of cynically, talking to like Steve Fancy from S2, or even like Darren Anders when he was a platoon before he died, and we were talking about it, and I was just like, it feels as though, in a way, it's like when you've lost a pair of nods, but you can't say we're not going to find them. You just got to fucking dig all night till you find something, or until they give up, but you don't get to make the decision to give up.
Right, and you don't want to tell anybody about it until they're actually lost.
Yeah. And for me, it's crazy because, there's a photo of me on an air assault that I did where it was like a platoon of SECO guys, a platoon of ACO guys, our scout platoon, and I want to say the 4th Platoon Delaware that was detached to Headquarters Company. And I went with the Hatchet Company commander, a couple of JTACs. They had a couple of Team Sharana guys. And I was like, oh yeah, that must have been, July 5th or July 6th, like full on, dust one. But then when I published that piece in the New York Times, I was like, oh, I'll get that photo. And I went and I looked at my old hard drive, and it's just like July 18th. And I was like, holy fuck, yeah, we were still doing air assaults like basically every day on July 18th.
Yeah.
That was almost 3 weeks after he had disappeared, and that whole month, we were just going at it. And, talking to guys later, it struck me that must have seemed so insane as a private, because like on my side, I mean, I didn't have any say in what was going on, but I sort of was getting the more top level information, at least. Like I was seeing the con ops for the raids. I knew what was going on. I could ask the battle captain what was going on. But in your case, like, how much did you know what was actually going on?
Not a whole lot. I've always been one who's wanted to know more. Not to put that in Starship Troopers terms, but I've always wanted to know more. And of course, being, a PFC, I didn't really get past a lot of information. It was more like, Thurman, get your fucking radio filled. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
Thurman, fill the fucking trucks. You guys, give me 5 to get this fuel blivet moved. But once what was his name? Oh, Sergeant Major Wolf. Once Sergeant Major Wolf got out there, and I think this was like day 6 or 7, and he just had like 2 logs of dip, and he was just passing them out. I knew we were going to be out there for a while.
Yeah, for sure.
Sergeant Major's passing out dip to everybody. You're like, oh shit, we're not going to even see the remote traces of a PX for at least the next week, 2 weeks, something. but it was kind of feeling like I was getting pulled in a lot of directions, and I think we were all feeling that. We were just kind of running around like that whole RC East, not really knowing what we were looking for and running on little bits of intel. Because I think at that point, when something like this happens, and you could probably speak more to this from your level, nobody's really written the playbook on that.
No, not really. I mean,
and you kind of go with what you got.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a cadet or when I was a lieutenant in training, it always seemed crazy to me when people would tell these anecdotes, like, oh yeah, like we just rolled out to an objective and we did the mission brief over the radio, But you find yourselves in those situations all the time where you have basically zero time to react, and you just kind of go with what you have. But what I guess what I remember the most is there were so many enablers that it got really challenging to figure out like what was actually happening, like what was related to, what was a lead in the sense that like we actually think we're going to find something versus what was just a like nice to have, like, hey, well, we've got a platoon, have them do X or Y or Z. When I talked to Lieutenant Perpich from DECO, his platoon had gone out for like a 24-hour hit that had turned into 10 days of nonstop just searching, just humping, like either walking from place to place or getting picked up by helicopters and dropped back down. So it was 10 days. They came back. They did a 24-hour refit. They went back out. They did 8 days. They came back. And he said it was just, he'd fire up the TACSAT and something would come through like, hey, go to this grid. And it was just that. It was like I don't know, what's the right word here? Like a scavenger hunt. Except periodically they'd take crazy amounts of contact because they were just tromping around the part of Ghazni that belonged to the Polish brigade that they weren't patrolling.
Yeah. I remember being out there a few times. We'd drive really, really, really far west, and we'd see those Polish APCs rolling around. And
the Rosamax, the like 8-wheeled vehicles, yeah.
Yeah, the Rosamax. We'd see those. And they'd be just driving, and we'd be in position for 36 hours waiting for something to pop off.
Yeah, I remember running into I think if Doyle was your platoon leader, I remember running into Will at like a traffic checkpoint somewhere near Four Corners, and just like coming up on like basically a serpentine of trucks, going out to Four Corners. There were and seeing like the Poles were doing like a fires registration thing out there, but it just seemed like there was an extent to which it felt kind of unreal. It was like there was all this urgency, but you didn't know whether or not the urgency was warranted, like it was going to turn anything up. It's like in the back of your mind you were like, wow, this guy really fucked himself, and now we're kind of paying the price for it. But it sounds crazy to in retrospect it sounds crazy to turn around and be like, oh, well, we shouldn't look. Because, obviously we're going to look. But there came a point where I don't know. It's weird, man. I say it because 5 years ago when the thing happened on the news, I felt like better able to speak, not definitively, but like convincingly to myself at least. Like I thought I was giving like a fair summation of things. But now I don't even really know because I'm like, well, did I hear that? Did that happen? It's been so long at this point, and that's what makes it so weird, is that some things are incredibly vivid. Like, I know exactly how the profile of those Polish APCs, but I can't remember some of those details, like whether or not, we were getting missions that explicitly mentioned Bergdahl, or if it was just like, hey, brigade has air, we're going to do air assaults.
Same.
And so it's just this much time later, it's more that this thing happened and it just kind of got out of control. And for me, at least, when I look back on it, it just was like the most insanely stressful thing I think I've ever experienced in my life. And in fairness, I wasn't even really that deep in it compared to, people who were in platoons. I was, like I said, the HHCXO at the time. I got tasked out for shit like anybody, but it wasn't like I was expecting to, be out for 10 days like you guys. And so I'm wondering then, when you think about this, was there ever a moment, because I remember talking to, I've forgotten, Cornelison, and him saying that he
Cornelison,
was... Cornelison saying that he'd kept like a journal in a green book, because he's like, I'm never going to remember the names of these places because like I'm too tired. But he said he remembered writing in his journal, and I think I recall him saying that like there were times when he just felt like he was writing really angrily, because he was like, you couldn't say it out loud, but like people were just thinking, I mean, fuck this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how it felt. That's how it felt the whole time. After about day 3 or 4, and the word was kind of subtly confirmed that this was a voluntary desertion. Intel had come down that he's probably in Pakistan, somewhere in one of the Fatah or something like that.
Yeah.
It really shits on your morale. You're like, what are we even doing?
Yeah.
Like this is a much higher tier than we are at this point.
Well, and also too, I mean, I remember all of this is like apocryphal. Like I think I remember, I want to say Captain Johnson from ACO saying this, that he'd heard. So this is like third hand at this point, that brigade, like that Colonel Howard had basically said, I don't give a fuck. You guys are going to do an air assault every night until the election or until we find this guy. And I don't know if that's true or not. It's the thing. Like I can believe, absolutely believe that Colonel Howard would say such a thing. But then again, it's like all of this stuff, so much of like the narrative, when I look back on it, it's either stuff that I saw with my own eyes or just some of the wildest shit you could possibly imagine people saying, because I think there's a PNN for every rank, Yeah,
I think there is too.
And so I want to talk about that really quickly, because we're like shift forward to the aftermath. But what was some of the stuff that you remember people saying?
Let's keep this in like a scope of 6 weeks. So like 6 weeks from 0 day to sometime in early August.
Yeah.
Couple of things that I heard. He was in Pakistan. He had converted to Islam.
Yep.
He had changed his name to Abdullah.
Yep.
He had been provided multiple women as wives.
Yep.
That, of course, some of the privates that had seen Zeitgeist thought that it was some sort of big government inside ploy to infiltrate the Taliban. All kinds of stuff.
Yeah. I remember the same thing. I remember seeing a printout in the talk of a source report, and then later on, you get to know people who work in Human, and you realize that like that's just somebody told me some bullshit and I typed it up in the right format. But like it was exactly
because I had to.
Exactly, because I had to. Because it was somebody saying that like he would train your fighters if you brought like a certain amount of tribute. Like he would train, and it was like he's like running a training camp or whatever.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing.
Oh no, but it's hilarious, because years later, I was on a talk show when the whole story broke. I want to say it was John Hockenberry on NPR, but somebody had called into the show. So it was David Rode, who like was like written for the New York Times and like had been held hostage by the Taliban. And then it was me, and then I can't remember if there was another third person, but this guy called in and he was like, well, I was an intel soldier in Afghanistan at the time. He'd been like a PFC or a specialist. And he repeated some of the stuff that you said, like some of those rumors, and like, John Hockenberry was like, oh, I don't know, are you sure this is stuff you want to like circulate? And I wish I had made the direct connection, because I at the time I was just like, yeah, there was so much stuff flying around, and so much of that stuff sounds authoritative. But what I really wish I had said in that moment on the interview is like, listen, I believe that you saw those reports, because literally those reports are when somebody types up the exact equivalent of you doing what you're doing right now, which is calling them on the phone and be like, I heard some fucking wild shit, man. And they write it up, because that's what Human is. But at the time it sounded so insane. It sounded so dire. It was like, oh my God, this is fucking Homeland.
Yeah.
If Homeland existed at the time, I don't think it did. I have, like Homeland might have come out after the fact, but when I saw the plot synopsis of Homeland, I was like, oh wow, this is like what they said Bergdahl was doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think at that point, you get so bored, you get so frustrated, you have no idea what's going on. I think your brain just starts to look at any possible outcome. And in that environment, I mean, I guess maybe not plausible, but it could have been possible.
Well, sure. I mean, I remember guys that I respected, guys that have like are still in, that are like gone on to be like senior field grades, getting promoted fast as shit. Guys who like had access to some of the information were telling me things that sounded like pretty dire, but then none of that ever seemed to be borne out with any other evidence. You know what I mean? Like if it had happened, I absolutely would believe that someone would disclose it, but it just never happened. So either this is the best OPSEC in fucking human history, or there's
right.
nothing to corroborate it. And so, like, as I heard it all, you know, that he was crawling through a ditch, he got into an SUV and drove away. There was total radio silence. Then all of a sudden, it was all this chatter of like different stories to like confuse people. I heard the stories about the wives. I heard the stories about like, oh, he taught the insurgents how to like use like casualty blankets to like hide their heat signatures from thermals or something like all this crazy shit. I don't even think that's fucking true, but like people in your mind, it makes it true because you want to believe that like Bergdahl has turned the Taliban into like fucking super soldiers. And,
right.
And so it's just so crazy when I think about that stuff because there was so much anger and that's where like the touchstone, like I want to like move forward because then almost 5 years to the day later, like Memorial Day 2014, out of fucking nowhere comes the news story that Bergdahl is back in U.S. custody, that he's been exchanged for 5 like early GWAT era Taliban, like former Taliban government detainees from like 0102, who are now going to be held like in escrow in Qatar for 5 years, and that he's been returned. And the news breaks and some shit starts happening. So maybe talk me through where you were and what happened then.
Yeah, I was in Prescott, Arizona. Had just finished a private pilot flight activity at my alma mater of Embry-Riddle. And, I get back to my car, of course, this is north central Arizona. Get back in my car. iPhone won't turn on because iPhone is hot. Please cool down before use.
Yep.
And when my phone finally turns back on, I have 19 voicemails, all from dudes I deployed with.
Uh-oh.
And I'm like, whoa, okay. Something has happened. And then, the texts start coming in, and the first one just reads, Bergdahl back in U.S. custody.
What did you think when you saw that?
I mean, I was shocked.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was angry because, again, I hadn't really thought about this for a few years. And then I was also kind of excited to get the story from his perspective.
Yeah.
And just figure out the why in the equation.
I feel that. I mean, yeah, there were so many unanswered questions and so many things like I wanted to know like what actually happened.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the anger is the thing that, I mean, I didn't really feel angry as much as, I mean, I'll back up on my side. So I got out of the Army. At the time I was dating a Korean woman. I'd been stationed in Korea for my last duty station. So okay. I went back to Korea when I was on terminal leave. I had 2.5 months of terminal leave. So I went back to Korea and I just went to like a private language school thing for like a month and was just like doing Korean class every day. And I was just getting ready to leave. It was like 3 or 4 days before I was leaving to go to like do some traveling, see some friends, and then I was going to come back to Korea before I went to the U.S. to start grad school. I woke up, probably 7 or 8 in the morning and checked my phone, and I saw the Bergdahl stuff. And then I had a bunch of Facebook messages. Like I had one from Sam Masamitsu from HHC, and he was like, "Holy fuck, they've got Bergdahl back." And he and I talked on the phone for like 2 hours that night. And I talked to some other guys, and I remember I posted on Facebook. I was like, "I hope you can all join me in the sigh of relief," I think I said, that we no longer have to ever give a fuck about Bergdahl ever again. And
yeah, I remember that.
And dudes got mad at me.
Gamboa.
Yeah, and dudes got fucking mad at me. Like fucking, I mean, I don't blame them, but I remember Alex Richnavsky was like, "What the fuck, sir? Like, how about all the fucking guys that he got killed?" And I was like, God, they're all so angry. And I was like, I'm not saying this like I'm like surveying the fucking soldiers like I'm some lord or some shit. It's just more that like for me, I just had a very different emotion, but I was like, I'm glad he's back. Fuck that guy, but I'm glad it's over. But then, the anger is, and I was like, man, folks are so angry about this.
Yeah. First of all, that's like the most Rich Navsky response you could ever think of. That's the most fish thing I've heard in a long time. Yeah, the anger. And then I had just reconnected a couple days prior with Doc Gamboa, if you remember him.
I know. Yeah, I'm pretty good friends with him. I still talk to him pretty regularly.
Great man. Saw him a couple months ago in Tucson. But I was talking to Doc, and we had made plans because I was headed up to Flagstaff from Prescott for the weekend, and the next day we met up for drinks, and I was like, dude, what? Whoa. Bergdahl's back. He's like, yeah, hopefully we get the story.
Yeah, I mean,
But
that's what I thought too. And then the press conference and the Sergeant Bergdahl served with honor and distinction thing, and everyone lost their minds.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that just a second ago. You kind of prompted me to think about grief and about loss, and about really trying to rationalize, what happened on deployment, and, come to terms with, the loss that we all experienced, Martinek and Lieutenant Andrews. And forgive me for not knowing the others' names off the top of my head, but I was thinking about my platoon in particular.
No, I'm the same way. I mean, I think about Brian Bradshaw. I mean, I still feel that very strongly. I thought of myself. I thought of him as a friend. We were close. We all knew each other as officers. But like Brian's death, Darren's death, Kurt Curtis from HHC. It all felt like, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it felt like the one outlet for the anger and the sense of betrayal and the sense of frustration that people felt for like this, 12, 13 month period, all poured out, focused like a fucking laser beam on Bergdahl.
And I think that's one of the things, I'm going to project my mom for a second, who's a military psychologist. I think that's one of the things that grief and unresolved grief in particular likes to do, is it really likes to point the finger and place blame and say, this is why I'm upset, because it makes it much more palatable and much easier digested than, war fucking sucks, bad stuff happens. And I mean, I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure I'm going to get cannibalized by some of the other vets for saying this, but that's exactly what I did. I was looking for an outlet, and I was looking for a reason why I was put in that position to draw straws with Matt Martinek. And, I drew the longer straw, and he ends up getting shot in the head.
Yeah.
So, Bergdahl comes back into the scene, and who do I point my fucking finger at? Him.
And so that turned into, Jake Tapper wrote this piece for CNN. There was a bunch of flurry in the news, and then full fucking disclosure, I wrote a piece for the Daily Beast that got way more fucking traction than I ever thought it was going to. And overnight, everything went insane. And when I was writing the piece, they formed a group on Facebook. You may remember the whole thing about like, it was like Bo Bergdahl's not a hero or some fucking group like that. It was some shit. Yeah, it sounds so crazy now.
Wasn't that a Cody Full group or something?
Yeah, it probably was. Yeah. And so like a lot of the guys were talking, and I remember, and God, I wish I had been a little more circumspect about this, but there was a soldier from Seco, from 1st Platoon Seco, who he was one of Brian Bradshaw's soldiers. And he said, guys, look, I really got to put my foot down about this. Like, I'm mad at Bergdahl. Fuck him. This is. We all have reasons to be mad at him, but be mad at him about the things that are real. I'm seeing people sharing stuff about guys who died in circumstances that were completely unrelated. I've even seen people sharing Brian Bradshaw's photo. He's like, he was one of the best officers I ever met, but he died 5 days before Bergdahl even went missing. So how are you going to blame Bergdahl for that? And I wrote this piece, and I thought I was being fucking clever. I thought I was being insightful by saying that, like, the memories that these guys have of the guys that they lost are always going to be there, and Bergdahl's back, but the problem is that these guys we lost all our comrades, and that is going to be forever tied with Bergdahl, because even though he didn't get them killed, we still think of those guys that we lost in the same time frame, and we're angry about it. And I wish I had been more clear about it, because instead what that story did, and this is also full disclosure, when you write a piece for something like the Daily Beast, they write whatever fucking headline they want. So I write this piece where I try to compare, I literally try to do like a fucking literary thing and compare it to Tim O'Brien's Going After Cacciato. I give it the headline Going After Bergdahl. Instead it comes back and the headline is, we lost soldiers looking for Bo Bergdahl, a man who deserted in the dead of night. And I was like, when it ran, I was like, oh fuck. They really wanted to, they really emphasized the guys dying, and that turned into this whole nightmare story. And so that morning, the story came out in Korea. It came out at like 7 a.m. It was like 6 p.m. in America. And I was flying, because I was going on vacation, I was flying to Indonesia. So I get on the plane, it was 7 hours of total fucking radio silence. And I just have the 7 hours to think like, oh my God, everybody's losing their mind. And the last thing I get before I get I have to turn my phone off is an email from Stan Johnson, the former ACO commander. And he's like, the story was great, but he's like, but why did you mention the names of all the guys who died? Their deaths weren't related to Bergdahl. And I was like, oh shit, did you think that did it seem like it came across like I was trying to make that link? And he's like, yeah, absolutely it did, man. And I was like, uh-oh, this is going to be fucking bad. And then the whole thing, that became the narrative, was Bergdahl got these guys killed. And it just, I mean, you saw the guys going on TV. You didn't go on TV, did you?
I did. Yeah. I just I went on TV once. I went on Fusion News with a gentleman named Pedro Andrade. He interviewed me, briefly, maybe like 5 or 6 minutes. I can send you the link after this. But that was pretty much it. I didn't really get a chance to share, other than I got interviewed by Dan Lamont.
Yep, I know him, yeah.
He's, I believe, Washington Post.
He is, yeah.
The Serial Thing, and then 2 NPRs.
Yeah, I did. I was on Anderson Cooper, and then I did NPR. I did. I want to say it was John Hockenberry. There was one other show. I did BBC right away, and then there were a couple others. But I mean, it's all hazy because it was all in the span of like 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
But that all happened. And the thing that sticks in my mind when I think about it is guys on Fox News, and it becomes this scandal like we shouldn't have brought Bergdahl back. Yeah. And that to me has always been like a weird, real, like a hard sticking point for me, is because it's like, man, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck if you were selling secrets to the enemy. Like, if we can get you back, we're going to get you back. Yeah. And the idea that people are like, no, in this case, we fucked up by bringing a guy back. It always seemed so, I don't know, like, did you feel that way? Like there was an extent to which, like you said, projecting that anger caused people to sort of almost like one up themselves in like their vindictiveness. And that vindictiveness became so intensely concentrated on this one kid. And like, he's an idiot and he did something really stupid. But there's a part of me that's like, if you're this mad, why are you this mad about just one private and not so many other things related to this war?
Yeah, you get that. And if I'm being completely honest, to answer your question, yes, I was. I let that scope get pretty tight on Bergdahl. A couple of factors. One, in my personal life, I was going through a breakup at the time, and then the Bergdahl thing happens. And, I was so angry and so confused, and there was so much media attention. Yeah. And I was getting fed so much information, primarily through social media, that I jumped on that train right away. Am I on it now? Absolutely not. Yeah, I'm glad we got him back. I'm glad we got the story, and I'm glad we, this went through the military justice system. But at the time, absolutely. I was like, fuck that guy. I can't believe somebody hasn't fucked him up in, whatever detention center he's in. But, so much stuff had come to the surface. And like you were saying, all of that grief and all of that loss and all of those memories that occurred during that same time frame of those 12 to 13 months that we were over in Afghanistan had surfaced. And the way the brain likes to do it is when it needs to start working something out, it works it out, and it's going to come out one way or the other. Like, I think my dip and Four Loko consumption skyrocketed during that time.
I got fucking, I'm not going to go so far as to say it was dysentery, but I got some kind of horrible stomach problem in Indonesia. And I'm like, part of it might have been bad food, but the other part of it is probably like, well, you were subsisting on nothing but instant coffee and cigarettes for like a week. So yeah, entirely possible that fucked your stomach up. I mean, who is to say though? But I think back on it too, that just the anger, and then when Serial announced they were going to do the show based on the whole thing about Bergdahl, while the trial was still going on, I was really weirded out about it, because I thought to myself, like, the only saving grace is that this is going to go through the military justice system, and that in one way or the other, there's going to be an answer. They're going to come by, they're going to do an investigation, they're going to say, this is what we believe happened, and that's going to be able to answer those questions. And so there's never going to be that shit about like, oh, he was lagging behind on patrol and like BCO soldiers just suck so bad they let their guy get picked up, or he was out drinking and driving in Afghanistan somehow, or whatever the fuck these stories were.
Or at a nightclub and in Yaya, Cal, I'm like,
Exactly.
I'm sorry, I didn't know there was a nightclub. Can I book a table and figure out where this is?
Last time I was in Yayakel, there was one single light in the entire town. So if there's a nightclub, like I really want to see it.
Yeah. How do we get access? Is there like can I text my, my person, my or what do they call them? The hosts. I'm trying to think Vegas. The concierge. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, man. I mean, so to me, in a sense, the idea that it was going to be answered, that seemed like such an important thing because in my mind, like, I just wanted people to be able to move on with their lives and not feel as though a part of them was still tied to this experience that at that point was, 5 years gone, and at this point is a decade gone. And so the thought that crossed my mind was like, if Serial thinks they're going to make this into like this beautiful twee dollhouse of a story, and then unintentionally or intentionally, who knows, winds up fucking up the trial, that's going to be a huge problem because that's going to, like, to me at least, like, I don't care if it's entertaining or not. What I care about is I want this thing settled and done. I want there to be a final record. Yeah. And so I chose to not go on Serial, but I mean, I think they only made like a half-hearted attempt to contact me anyway. I'm wondering, how did you wind up getting contacted, and what made you go through with it?
I got contacted randomly. I got a friend, Jessica Weisberg, and she was kind of consulting on Serial, and she had passed my number on to Dana Chivvis, the producer of Serial. And I get this random text one day. Jessica had told me the day prior, you mind if I pass your information on to one of my friends who has a podcast? Now, I had never heard about Serial at the time at all. And I'd listened to a couple of like techno podcasts and like Joe Rogan and stuff like that. But I had no idea like the range that this podcast had. So Dana hits me up, asks me, does like a phone screen, for lack of a better term, the following day. And then she was like, you know what, let's get you in the studio. So I did that one big interview, and then the podcast airs, and right around like episode 7 or 8, they bring me back for a second to really kind of stitch up the end of the story.
Yeah.
But they reached out, and there has to be some sort of media database of, people who speak on some sort of public platform, because randomly one day, when the trial was going forward, I get called by NPR. I'm like, first of all, how did you get my number? They're like, oh, we know.
Yikes.
We know all the things.
Yeah, that so similar. That happened to me, just as an aside. That folks, I was out of the U.S., but producers managed to get my parents and my grandparents' phone numbers, and started calling them. And like the funniest, dumbest thing, my grandma was like, "I'll give you his email address, but first I need to ask you. Do you think he wrote a good piece?" And they're like, "Oh yes, we think he's a great writer." Like, all right, that's what I needed to hear. And I'm like, "Yes, compliment my damn grandson before I give you his contact information." It's fucking amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so you gave this interview, and I think the thing that really struck me about hearing your voice on that was that in the second part, you really like articulated something that I was hoping that I'd be able to achieve at some point, where you said that like, I've realized that my anger is tied up in the experience, and that Bergdahl was just sort of like the touching point for that, but that what I'm mad about, what I was angry about, was bigger, and it wasn't him. It was just the experience itself, and it was sort of unprocessed. Yeah,
that's exactly what it was. And like, to be honest, Serial kind of gave me an opportunity to verbalize a lot of shit that I hadn't in the past. Like, not even in therapy, because I've done a ton of therapy post deployment. I had a pretty rough childhood growing up too. And with trauma, things like to compound. And, when the Bergdahl thing is going, everything's getting stirred up. And the one thing that I had never verbalized to anybody was, that I was sad, that I was grieving, that I was repackaging this grief and this tremendous loss, and also the guilt. Because I remember, like I know I touched on this earlier, but what happened was Sergeant Mansfield came up to Martineck when I, both of us being RTOs at the time, I had trained him up, with 2 straws in his hand to see who was going to be the RTO on that mission. And I literally pulled the longer straw, and he ends up getting shot in the head. So I've got this tremendous sense of responsibility and this tremendous sense of guilt. And, sadness, especially for men, is not really an easy thing, especially men that were in the infantry.
Yeah.
We're told, dude, knock that shit off.
It's like fucking, you're supposed to, fuck it, drive on. It's like, well, that's great. That's great for getting the mission done, but like not for the rest of your life, I hope.
Right. So, I had this opportunity to sort of repackage this and project it with the Bergdahl thing. And it was coming out in a really weird way. But, Serial interviewed me. Let's see. It would have been, 14 months later. And for the first time, I was able to really verbalize and be honest on record of what actually was going on.
I mean, it's weird to me, when you talk about that, because 4 days before Brian Bradshaw died, he was up at Sharana because they had to basically get all their Afghan contractors and truck drivers for this mission because they were going to go, bring gravel down to build this airfield at Kushamand. And when Lieutenant Cody got blown up, he got injured. He was leading the OCCP. I was like, that's the job I want. More than anything, that's the job I want. And they put Brendan McCormick down there, and then he needed to get rotated out to be a platoon leader. So they were sending him to Seco to fill in. The original plan was going to be McCormick goes to Seco to take over 1st Platoon. Bradshaw comes up to the OCCP. He takes over. And Nate, you get to stay as HHCXO working with Captain Levine. I was so happy to see Brian. It was great to see him, and he seemed like he was just had really kind of flourished as a platoon leader. He just seemed more confident. Everything about him, I was like, man, I'm jealous because you got to be a platoon leader in combat and I didn't. It doesn't matter that I led patrols, but it's not the same thing as having your own platoon downrange, and you're going to go do this job that I want. And I really am jealous. I'm jealous that you got to have this experience. I'm jealous that you're getting this job that I get to have. I wish you well. Of course, I care about you, but of course, deep down, I was just kind of bitter about it. And he wasn't happy to be leaving his platoon either. He was like, do I really want to go fucking live with those fucking people as opposed to doing my job? And I mean, part of me was like, fuck you. And the other part of me was like, well, no, I understand it. Well, I got to be the OCCP commander because Brian fucking died.
Yeah.
He died, and they were like, well, who's going to fill it in? All right, Nate, you do it. And I'm not going to say that it fucks with me in a hard way now. Like you said, I've gone through therapy quite a bit, and I've talked about it too. And it's just that I think more than anything else, though, how do you articulate that guilt, that feeling of I lucked out in a way, and my life has changed significantly. I've gotten to get a new chance on life, basically, because I made it back. Somebody didn't, and that person, was just like me, and there was zero difference between us, basically, and they don't. And I think that, for me at least, I don't know why, but I mean, just saying this now, talking the same way that you kind of process things with being on Serial, I think that I wrote the piece that I wrote because I kind of I wanted people in 501st to respect me, I guess. I wanted to be the person who could speak authoritatively, but also in a humane way. And I thought I got it right, and I got it really wrong. And I mean, to this day, obviously, I'm a little bit reticent to but talking about it because it's I don't want to be the guy who wrote the Bergdahl piece that got everybody on everyone's fucking Fox News grandpa really mad. You know what I mean? But it was all wrapped up in this feeling of why am I here? Why did I make it? And this guy didn't. And that has nothing to do with Bo Bergdahl walking off a fucking outpost. It was just that was the vehicle for it.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, looking at this from a big objective picture, Nate, the thing that you did, really well is that you wrote it and you got it out there, because it had to feel a little liberating at the time to do so, to just sort of verbalize everything through your writing and get it out there and sort of objectively process everything that had happened.
Yeah, it's just crazy though, because when I look back on it now and I'm like, I think I would never, nowadays, I think I would be so much more cautious about, do I have the details right? Do I have have I gone through, and I realized all these conversations that I had years and years later, whether it was like with Captain Gelfgat or Colonel Baker or Captain Johnson or any of these other guys that I met that were like way senior to me that had a bigger picture than me. I'm like, wow, I really didn't know what I was talking about. Like I had some details right, but I had so much I just didn't know. And would I be confident in saying that now? No, I probably wouldn't. But it's that weird in that moment. It's just sort of, I guess, to be honest with you, man, I wrote it because in my mind I was like, if this doesn't become a big deal, they're gonna have like a fucking homecoming parade for Bergdahl before they realize that what had actually happened, before that gets out, and that's gonna fuck with the brains of the guys so much worse, people from 501st. And the weird thing is though, is that now, at age almost 35, I look at this and I'm like, I mean, would that have been that big of a deal? Probably not. But at the time I was like, no, that cannot happen. I have this moral fucking imperative. I must do this. And I just don't have that anymore. I don't have that sense of sort of, if not commitment, then just like intensity about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, same. Cause I'm right there with you. I'm turning 33 in a couple of months and I'm just like, how would I have handled that situation now versus, me at 27?
Yeah.
Or 28, whatever I was. I would have done the same thing. I would have made sure that I had everything straight. I would have taken a few days, done some yoga, done some float tanks prior.
Yeah.
Not gotten all ramped up on dip and loco. And I would have said, okay, what's really going on here? How can I articulate this more accurately? But I think, where we were at the time, we were caught in the middle of, one of the most controversial stories in the global war on terror.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to think that we probably did the best we could at the time with the information we had.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird though. And I was a little bit fucked up about a couple of things because I realized Colonel Baker and I talked and he said basically, and he was patient, but he basically said, look, I think that your analysis of the situation where you say that Bergdahl causing the AO to get worse might have led to these people's deaths. He's like, whether you wanted to say that or not, I think that's a superficial analysis. My concern at this point is that now the families of the guys who died are going to think that something was kept from them and that like there's some secret about, that the army didn't tell them about why their children died. And that hit me really hard because I was like, oh my God, the last thing on earth I want to do is cause more pain to these families who have already lost their children or their spouses. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then after the fact, I realized what you just said. And it's like, I mean, but that's what everybody, I don't know, it's not universal, but like anybody who's ever had to make a decision in combat that's gone bad, that's gone wrong, it's not gone the way they wanted, is gonna, you either drown in this sea of what if, or you just say what you just said, which is like, well, give yourself the benefit of admitting that you did the best you could in the circumstances. And that's a fucking work in progress, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it is.
But it sounds like you've moved on significantly, and that's really good to hear.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it's taken a lot of work, and it's been very active work. And the work is still ongoing, but you have to set your intention on it and be like, I'm not going to let this fuck with me anymore, and I'm not going to let the Taliban keep winning its war in my head. I'm not doing it.
So I got to ask this because a lot of our listeners probably have similar feelings about their deployments, but there wasn't an international news story into which they could sort of come to this, focus their energy, and then also come to this conclusion. So what do you think, if you could give advice, say you have at this point the ear of potentially thousands of folks who have deployed to combat and may or may not have made the kind of like processing progress that you have, what would you recommend?
As far as initiating the processing?
Yeah.
Oh man, just be as brutally honest with yourself as you can. I know it's hard. It's really, really, really hard. Figure out what works for you. Mine, I think you probably remember. I'm short. I'm stocky. I got a super bouncy walk. So running is not an easy thing for me. But I run all the time because it gives me the opportunity to really get inside my head and figure things out. I'm a big fan of Bikram yoga, float tanks. where you're just completely deprived of light, of sound. You're floating in this isothermal, very, very, very high salinity water. And the only thing you're in there with is yourself and your consciousness.
Yeah. Go
in there, feel the feelings, be honest with yourself about the feelings, and then therapy. Therapy helps. The preferred therapy that I do is EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's basically what that does is it uncouples the negative emotion from the traumatic memory in your brain, and it allows you to just move forward. Because the thing that is possible is healing and moving past all of it.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, that sounds amazing. And I mean, just to hear you say that I feel like for people who are considering doing it, I really hope they do. Because I mean, for me too, I went through a lot of counseling, you know, when I got out of the military, and
yeah,
it's definitely. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's 100% all the time, but it has helped. And I think for me, my sort of like my special thing that I do is I cycle, and I live in London. I live in a big city, and cycling in a city requires absolute focus because otherwise it's really dangerous. And you can't really be in your own head too much when you've got to have your eyes forward the whole time. And so in a way, it's weird. It's like what's worked for me is basically, you know, 8, 9, 10 times a week, you know, depending on if I'm riding to and from the office, being forced into 20-minute periods of not being able to overanalyze shit and just paying attention to fucking cars as I'm writing has made such a difference in terms of just and I'm always in a better mood when I do it. And it's just weird. It seems like it's going to be work for the rest of my life. And I imagine you feel the same way, but
absolutely.
But it's better than not processing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like working in tech, you know, there's going to be days where you have nothing going on, and there's going to be days when shit has completely hit the fan and you're getting pulled, you know, in hundreds of different directions per day. Well, and, you know, apply that same framework to combat. I mean, I don't think anywhere in the evolution of the human being, you know, our brains got wired for the stuff that we have to see. I mean, we saw the same kind of shit every day. You know, we were shooting at other people. You know, we were shooting people. We were seeing people's basic human rights denied by their own country.
Yeah. And
we were really seeing the worst of humanity in what others are capable of doing to each other. And I think when you see something like that, it's going to be with you forever. And you can either let it just keep destroying you, or you can actively work against it. And I'm glad to hear that you're doing that. And I hope everybody does that, all of your listeners, if they're dealing with the same kind of thing.
No, I can't tell you how relieving it is to hear you tell that story, because I mean, because of politics and because of stuff, you know, I don't really post prolifically on Facebook anymore because I just don't want to argue with anybody.
Yeah, I don't even have one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll post up on Twitter, but people sort of know what they're getting, and fewer people who follow me on Twitter know me in real life. But I realize that I disagree with the guys that I served with on probably about 99% of things when it comes to politics. And so in a way, it's like I don't really engage with stuff because I just don't want to see like the hatred and like the negative shit that people are saying all the time. But it doesn't mean I don't care though. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean that I don't want people to be able to like move beyond the selves that they were when they were deployed and be able to like achieve success and happiness in their lives. And so it's like that, hearing you say that just makes me hope that like more people hear this or people hear something similar, because I don't know, man, it's just, to me, I guess the thing, you know, a lot of my friends are still in, guys that I served with who are officers, they're still in, they're majors now. So they're still in, they're still living it, but they've had multiple deployments, you know, it's not just the one. I did one and then some other some other stuff in the Army and then got out. And so for me, it's like, I don't want to be wedded to myself at 24 and 25 and constantly sort of enthralled to these experiences, as opposed to like actually being able to face whatever else happens in my life positively. You know, I don't want to be like, oh, well, I'm just going to be a drunken asshole and be fucking defective from now on, and I might live 50, 60, 70 more years, but I'm going to be this way because of shit that happened when I was 24.
Right.
Like I just don't want to, I can't accept that. And I really hope that other people see how much more life there is to be lived,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's beautifully put. Because I think both of us see that. We see so many of our friends that we deployed with, still doing that, still obsessing over the guns and still holding on to what happened. And, bless their hearts, wearing fucking grunt style t-shirts every day.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I believe me. Fuck's sake, man.
About the extent of mine is I drive a Toyota Tacoma with a Geronimo sticker on the back, but that's it.
I cycle in London with my reflective belt on my backpack. So I mean, maybe I'm still doing it, but like there's no skulls on it.
Yeah, right. And if you didn't have that reflective belt, sir, accidents would happen. The next chaotic event would occur.
Exactly. I mean, deep down there's a sergeant major somewhere who's like, I'm just really happy right now. I don't know why, but someone must be wearing a reflective belt even when I'm not telling them to.
Exactly.
Well, Jon, thank you so much for making time for this on a Saturday. And
sir, I appreciate it.
I really appreciate hearing your story. And like I said, I will. I don't know if you have any public thing that you want to plug or anything that you find that you think is interesting or just something that's like a resource that you think people should know about. But I'm happy to give it some attention.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'll get throw my Instagram handle on the podcast thing. I love when people reach out and ask me for more directly. But yeah, I'll get an email list typed up if you shoot me your email of a couple of resources to go to for therapy and things like that.
That's really helpful, man. Well, thank you so much again, and to all of our listeners who are listening to this, please feel free to reach out to Jon, and we'll talk to you next week.